I'm Jeanette Pincus, and this is Wednesday, August 16th, 2023, and I have the opportunity to interview Deborah Linksman, and we're doing a special interview. This is about her getting to be the kosher butcher in Dallas. So Debbie, the first thing I want to ask you about is about your background, about your family, but whatever you'd like to share with us.
Grew up in Dallas, came from a very traditional Jewish home, conservative, which is not the same today that it was back then. Two of my brothers went to Akiva. And
What are their names?
Andy and Reuben.
Okay.
And one day Andy came home and he said, "Dad, I want to keep kosher." And my dad said, "Sure. That means no more McDonald's, no more Burger King. If we do it, it's all or nothing." And Andy thought, and he goes, "Nah, I don't think so." But we did keep kosher for Pesach. And I did ask my mom, how come it was only on Pesach? And of course, the question is, my mom did it. And I said, okay, so Mom, Grandma and Grandpa were religious, so why did they stop? And she said that she had a sister that was technically the middle child that had died as an infant, and they took her to the hospital, and my grandmother blamed it on the kosher meat because she had just fed her, and she got really sick. And of course, back in the 20s, refrigeration wasn't the same as it is today, so and I don't think we had baby food like we do today. So she said she quit keeping kosher except for Pesach. She couldn't bring herself not to keep kosher on Pesach. So that's the way I was brought up. And when Passover came around, I did not eat in the lunchroom at school. Mark and I ate in the nurse's office or in the principal's office. Mom didn't want us to be tempted or our food get contaminated by the non-kosher food for Pesach. So I went to Hebrew school. Andy and Reuben went to Akiva. Mark went to Hebrew school. We were members at Shereth Israel. Mark and I, well, I think all of us actually, besides being bar and bat mitzvah there, went through confirmation and graduation through the whole 9 yards. Back then they also had a junior congregation, so Judaism was a part of us. We were very proud of being Jewish. And Mom took us out for all the holidays. And I thought, you know, when I have kids, I'm going to drag my kids to shul, just like Mom did, and on the holidays. It was important to her, and even though back then I didn't think it was important to me, and I hated it, I wouldn't say exactly hated it, but there was a group of us that were always there, and those have remained my friends even today. A lot of us are still in Dallas, so unfortunately now we're seeing each other more because parents have passed away and we have yard sites and stuff. But I'm trying to think.
Well, I know it sounds to me your parents, Mike and Ginger Jacobs, had a big influence on you.
They did. They did. And it was very important that I raised my children in the same manner that my parents raised us as being Jews. Mm-hmm. It was very important to us. And Dad, being a Holocaust survivor, was even more so. The fact that he lived through it and never lost his faith in it, and even when he spoke, he just said he kept his faith, and if it was that important to him, it became that important to me. So, and then Mom, who started the Jewish Historical Society, I got to the point where I'd go through my papers and start clipping everything, and I'd bring them over, and my dad would go, "Why are you bringing her more stuff? She already has it." And Mom's like, Mike, don't worry. I might have missed something.
Now, getting an opportunity to be the kosher butcher in Dallas, how did that happen?
When I got married, I decided I was going to keep kosher. And it wasn't so much because that was the thing to do. It was because I had a lot of friends that kept kosher. And I knew if I did my bris, which never happened, but the baby namings, it was important that the rabbis were able to eat, and they're supposed to. And I just needed to make sure everything was for them. And I became more and more strict, started with reading ingredients and stuff, but it had to have like a K, which is not recognized anywhere, really. I mean, if people use it, they think it is, but it also, with keeping kosher and having supervisions like the OU and the Star K and everything, they come to your place quite often and checking it out. If you're a manufacturer or something, even I'm sure David Shaw, when he goes, he's looking at every ingredient. And to back up being an Orthodox supervision, you got to be strict about it. With the K, they kind of maybe every 6 months, maybe a year would go by. So anyway, so I got very discouraged with some of the things that were happening with the kosher butcher here. And that part I won't go into, but it made me think about opening my own business after the kids got a little bit older. And then when I decided to do it, actually go into it, the VOD was not as supportive of me opening my own shop. They didn't want the competition with Reichman. So they tried to make a shidduch. So they went to a guy in Houston who had a shop and said, why don't you guys come together, and if you open a shop together, then that would be okay. And so I said, okay, let me talk to the person, and that just didn't work out. So the other option was buying Reichman out. And Sol was ready to move to Israel. And so we came to an agreement with the help of my father and took over the shop.
What year was that about?
93.
And y'all were located?
At Coit and Campbell on the northwest corner. So Sol moved the shop from Preston Royal up there because his lease was up and it was getting too expensive. So that's what he moved. When I wanted to open up another shop, I wanted to go back south and be like in the Preston Royal, Preston Forest area. So, and according to the Torah, there's things in the Torah that says you can't put another Jew out of business. So that's why they wanted me to buy him out. But there's also a mile thing in there. So I was going 5 miles south, which hopefully wouldn't have affected his, and we'd be servicing 2 groups of people. And they wouldn't let me do it. So that's how I wound up there. So that was, I'm trying to think if it was in the spring or the fall of 93 I took over. And then Sol moved to Israel.
And you kept his
Lorenzo.
staff, you kept Lorenzo, okay.
I kept Lorenzo, and I brought in Jacob Kreitman from Louisville, Kentucky. His daughter was working with me in my daycare, and she told me about him. And he had his own butcher shop, and he had his own issues with his brother and stuff, so he was more than willing to come here because his daughter was here and the grandkids were here, and so they moved to Dallas. And he was my butcher. He was my Shomer Shabbos Mishkiach butcher. And eventually he had to quit working due to health reasons.
Looking at the customer base that you had, did you notice, I know it was more north too,
Right.
but ages, the type of people that were coming in, were they local people, were there new people to the community?
Most of them were the regular customers. Dad had been with Reichman for years. And what was fun about it is that Lorenzo knew all their orders. And Pesach would call around and he goes, now you need to make sure you have this, this, and this because Mr. and Mrs. want this and so wants this, and we gotta have plenty of it. So, and then he would even have me call people to make sure, you know, it was there. So Lorenzo even taught me how to cut meat and grind meat and stuff. And one of the best things is Dad, since he was retired, would come up to the store every morning and he would sit at that table. And one time Max Zucker came in and said, "Hi, Mike," and Dad was just sitting there just and then he would go to my dad and he goes, "You know, Mike, if you wore hearing aids, you'd be able to hear everything." So, but no, he was there the whole time that I had the shop, and I learned a lot from him because he had a business, and he would run the register, and Rivka was about 10 when I got it, and she knew how to run the register, and we had customers that said, "I don't want her," so Dad would have to come up and do it. And then she would help me with inventory. We would do inventory. And she was so good in math, she was running the numbers in her head. And I'm feeling like a dummy because here she is 10, 11, and here I am 30-something, and I can't do math in the head. And Lorenzo was the same way. He could do it in his head. And I said, "How do you do that?" And he goes, "When you do it enough, it starts coming natural." So, but obviously Pesach was my business time of the year. That's when I made most of my money and would carry. And I decided that I wanted to do catering. So I got a rotisserie, and I actually bought a used rotisserie from Albertsons. And Rabbi Shaul came in and koshered it. So had a little issue with the sticks that hold the chickens on, because you have, and to kosher it, you gotta catch it basically on fire so the metal will light up. Well, it was warping my metal, and I go, we just can't do it at height. I mean, technically I think it's 500 degrees. So, but I started making rotisserie chickens, and then I started doing casseroles, and I would do vegetable plates and stuff. And then I started working with hotels because I found that there's a need for having a fresh kosher meal when we had conventions. And what American Airlines would always have conventions. The Fairmont Hotel would have conventions, and they weren't going to open kitchens for just one person. So if there was a convention there, they would call me and say, "I've got a Jewish person coming," and I go, "Okay, what's your menu?" Have the person call me, and I will try to duplicate what you're making and send it over. And I got permission to send wine, you know, because they had to have wine. Well, if the customer wanted wine, but bringing a bottle of kosher wine, they let me do it at the time. So I started that, and that was rolling around really well. And then I would have customers that would come, and I'd close, I think, closed at 6 or 7. maybe 7 o'clock. And I'd be closed, and they'd be tapping on the window because I was the only place, so I would open up. And while we were cleaning up, we'd feed them. So, but I love Passover. I love the Jewish holidays because everyone was coming in. Even people who didn't keep kosher, they would have to have kosher meat for whatever reason. And I also got a lot of Passover. I got a lot of non-Jews in because they wanted the matzah for communion. It was a good way to get rid of it after Passover.
So I was wondering about that. I was going to ask you what the holidays were like, but
The holidays,
yes,
they were so much fun. You just saw everyone, and everyone would congregate inside, and everyone would be, everyone's a yenta, so they would be sitting there talking, and, it was fine.
yeah.
So, it was a good time. I was sad to close.
Yeah. So any other best memories that you have that like kind of pop up in your head?
Well, this one's not such a best memory. After one of the Jewish holidays, I think it was Simchas Torah. So the first 2 days, the last 2 days, obviously, we would close the store. And because of the refrigeration, I would have to go to the store and make sure everything was okay. And so Rivka came with me that time.
Do you kind of know what year this was? Was it a couple years after you'd been in business?
I would say, let's see, I opened in 93, maybe 95,
Okay.
96 the latest. I don't know, I have to look at the pictures. So, anyway, we drove up and there was swastikas on the windows and hate messages on the windows and die Jew, and it was on the pillars and everything, and I took pictures.
What was the name of your shop?
The Kosher Link.
That's okay.
So, which one of my Mahjong girls came up with it? And so
It definitely, I mean, it was, they knew it was a kosher shop, right?
Yeah. So Susie Avneri came up with that name, and she said it would be perfect because the last name was Link, Kosher Link to the Jewish community. So kind of a play on it.
Yeah.
So anyway, we called the police, and of course the Anti-Defamation League got involved, and I found out later that one of the high schools in Richardson was doing a history on it, and I don't know if someone felt like one person wanted to dress up as Hitler, one of the kids, if that what the influence was, but anyway, they vandalized it. And Rivka, for the longest time, did not even want to have anything part of the shop. It just scared her so bad. And I didn't want my dad to see it.
I was going to ask you what your dad
So, no,
reacted to
Dad
that.
saw it, because he came up the next day, and my heart just broke for him because it was like all over again. So, not so much the past, what he went through, but the beginning of what he went through. As a teenager, and here I had a daughter.
And you mentioned Rivka. What about your other 3 daughters? But I know they were getting younger and younger.
Well, Lisa was, let's see, Rivka I think was 10 when I opened it. She was born in 83. She was 10. So then Lisa would have been close to 9. She was either 8 or 9, depending on what part of the year. And then Sarah, depending on what part of the year, would have been 7 or 8. And then Aviva was like 3, going on 4, I think. No. Or was she born? Let's see. She was 89. Yeah, so she was about 3. So Aviva used to like to play in the boxes. So So, sit on the shelf if there was an open box and climb into the box. Just the easiest toy than the most fanciest toy. Boxes are great for little kids. So, the other girls really didn't help much. Rivka was the one that really was old enough to do stuff.
And very aware of something that was going on.
Very aware of doing it.
After that incident, which I don't remember happening, but I think I should have at the time, the ADL you mentioned was involved, and it just was reported. And
it was reported in the morning news too, I think.
Yeah.
So, and I even think it got pictures in the paper.
Were you able to just reopen immediately after?
Yeah, I reopened. The landlord of the shopping center came and looked at it, and then immediately had it all washed off. I wasn't going to wash it. I wanted them to see what was going on.
Yeah. Any other, I know we're talking about some memories, and you said the holidays were most fun, where everyone would come. Were there any challenges that you felt you had?
The challenge was getting rid of the co-ops. So, and unfortunately they're still here today, with even Tom Thumb and Trader Joe's and Kroger, who has a little bit. We still have the co-ops, and in a way it's kind of sad, but I know some of the co-ops that happen, the Jewish community is so much different now than what it was. When I was growing up, you had Temple Emmanuel, Tiferet Israel, Shereth Israel, and then Akiva started, and Akiva started at North Haven in the tollway, which was actually a railroad track back then. There was this little school building there, and then they moved to Churchill. And so we had Shari Tefillah that came, I think, a while after that. And the community got more religious, and you had a bigger growth in the kosher business. I think when I started it, there were maybe 1,000 families that actually kept kosher. And the thing with kosher is, just because they keep a kosher house doesn't mean they eat kosher out. They would eat, some people eat whatever they want, some people will eat dairy and parve stuff like fish and everything. So the fact that we've got restaurants now is nice. And it's a nice alternative. It's not like New York or Florida, but anyway, so we also have Chabad, and you have data, and everyone's level is different on kashrut, even with meat. And so like Chabad has Shora Bora that they like, and some won't eat Empire, they'll eat Aaron's. So it gets whatever we don't carry here, they're getting there. And there's a lot of things we don't have here. If you come from New York, what they have in kosher and wines and all that is so much different here. So I can see why people want to buy out, but you know, you got, I'm going to say something my mom used to say, I'm going to get on my soapbox. If you want to keep it here, you got to support it here. So, and that's with everything.
What was your decision? You closed.
I closed.
And when was that? Like, how long had you had the business?
I closed right after Pesach of '98. I needed to get through Pesach so I could pay off my suppliers, which some didn't get paid. I even tried to, I had Manischewitz, and I tried to pay him right there. They got me the bill, and he goes, "Oh, we can't take a check." I go, "What do you mean you can't take a check? I'm trying to give you the money for the deal." And he goes, "Nope, you got to send it in and do it." It had to go through this whole thing. I go, "Okay, but it might not be here." And then I had Twin Cities, which they knew the trouble that I was in when it started open. Albertsons opened across the street on the southeast corner on my birthday. So it was in November of '97. And Mom and I actually were at a food fair, the kosher food fair up in New Jersey, at the Meadowlands, I think it's called. And so on one end I was happy, and on the other end I was like crying, because I knew it was I couldn't compete, especially being across the street. And so my goal was getting through Pesach. And Twin Cities was still sending me food, knowing that they might not get paid, just so I could get something. That was one way they were going to get their money. So, so I would say I officially closed down in June, and I just had to sell everything off that was in there. And that was the end of the story of the Kosher Link.
Just in conclusion, I think, is there anything else that you wanted to share about this? Any feelings that are coming up, or because what fascinating stories that you have with this?
I missed the butcher shop. Would I go into it again? No. The downside of having it at the time that I had it, I still had young kids, and then I think they suffered a little bit, maybe a lot. They ate a lot of meals at the store. I spent a lot of time. I spent 80 hours, maybe 90. Pesach, I would go home to basically shower and change, and maybe get an hour's nap, and then be back at the store for a whole week, like the week before Pesach. And Lorenzo was right by my side. We'd just lock it up, and we'd be cutting orders. So, so it was kind of sad, but I also kind of came to the realization that some things happen for a reason, and maybe the reason it needed to happen is so I could focus back on my family.
Well, Debbie, thank you so much for sharing this with us. And thank you for being part of the Jewish community. This was a very important part for us.
Well,
thank you.
it was fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.